was about. So I decided it was, PCS is my acronym for Pennsylvania Core Standards. I had to figure out if it was a good product. And how do you determine if it's a good product? Because I'm no expert on this. So I found out that good standards define the what the children have to learn. The curriculum and instruction defines the how. Let me just say that again. Good standards are the what, and the curriculum defines the how. You would also expect it to have had a good framework if it's considered a good product. So a good framework, we want to know if the right people were involved in its design. We want to make sure that the goals were properly defined and that there was a mechanism for evaluation and feedback on the product itself, on the Pennsylvania Board. Is it a good product? Because I didn't know. People said it's lousy, they were acting on emotion, and other people said it's fine. I didn't know. So I just had to figure out how I would decide. Number two, I had to figure out if the standards were rigorous. Rigor and difficult are two different terms. Rigor refers to expectations that are academically, intellectually, and personally challenging. And it simulates deep questions on their own assumptions, learners' own assumptions. A lesson that is simply hard will most likely lead to disengagement, frustration, and discouragement. That started to resonate with me. I'm told they're rigorous, but what I started to hear about stories with the children that were becoming discouraged. Okay, then I also heard there's too much testing. Well, I don't know. What's too much testing? How much is too much? I guess you got to look at how much time is spent on it. By the way, nobody can tell that to me yet in my district. They're working on exactly how much time in each grade each kid is being tested. We had to make sure if tests are going to be good, you have to make sure that what you're measuring is being that what you're testing is what you want to measure. I don't want to test your knowledge of Russian on an English exam. You have to measure what's being tested. And then, of course, you have to balance how much time a student does have to be tested. We have to know where they stand on these things at certain points in time. But each time they're tested, remember that they're out of the classroom instruction time. So to me, that was a trade-off that I didn't know whether I'd be advocating for or against the amount of testing. So then the fourth prong that I was struck with when I got into this was the data mining. Everybody was, ooh, data mining, data mining. I went to my administrators and they laughed at me. What are you talking about? We're not capturing any student data. Well, the world opened up for me shortly thereafter. Okay, so just to illustrate some of the confusion, probably real quick, some of you guys are probably in this or are in the same boat. I was told we didn't even have Pennsylvania did not adopt the Common Core. You're so stupid. Don't you know anything? And of course I went, cowering away, tail between my legs every time people told me this. So sure enough, it says that the state board adopted the Common Core standards on July 25th. So I go back. What do you mean? Of course we have. It's right here. I found it in the codes in the fact sheet. Oh, no. We have new standards. They're called the PA Core standards. We don't have the Common Core standards. Silly me. I got to go back and redo all my research. Then I heard rigorous. No, they're rigorous. No, they're good standards. They're not lax standards. Then I started to see things like this. This is a third grade mathematic sample from the PSSA. I'm looking at a nail, and I'm looking at it. And I love math. I don't care if rigorous or confusing. I don't know. This is the answer sheet. I felt bad for the kid who had to pick which one was his answer. Rigorous. Oh, I love this example I found. Okay, I like that way. The old way. Boy, that's simple. I could do it in my head. Has anybody seen this new way of doing math yet? Have you? Have you all figured it out? Well, it's so simple, guys. Add the 3, the 5, the 10, and the 2. What do you get? 20. Just add those numbers up. That's no big deal. What they did was, real quick, they took the 12 to the nearest 5 by adding 3, and they took the 15 to 5 to teach them how to finger count. That's the advanced math. I had fun with that one. It took me 15 minutes of looking. So then I heard about psychometrics. Oh my goodness, is this really that diabolical? And then I started looking at the answer sheet for these PSSA things, and I said, they're analyzing the kids' wrong answers, misreads the 200, thinks this represents it. They're right inside my kid's head, so I am starting to get a little bit concerned. And knowing now big data and how easy it is to track every little minutia of data, it all do righteousness, they probably are recording the right answers and the wrong answers as well as the right answers to do a psychological profile. But I'm not sure about that. Right now I'm just trying to explain how, when I jumped into this, how confused I was. And then I backed up and I said, well, what exactly is it? So I don't know standards from curriculum, from lesson plans. Common Core is a set of high-quality academic standards in math, English, language arts, and math and language arts, we'll just say. It was developed, again, by the National Governors Association and the Council of Chief Superintendent's Officers, I can't remember. But they're not legislators. They're not represented by the people.
Are they real governors?
At the time they were. At the time they had to be.
So they're former governors, or at the time that they put
They were all, like they're not governors now.
Governors of the state.
Yes, yes. But that's not a state-led initiative. That's not what you consider a state-led
That's what it
initiative.
say.
You didn't hire your
Well, we
governor.
didn't
to
know
rep-
about it at the time.
Right, right, and we didn't. We didn't. It's not the way you bring in massive overhauls in, Pennsylvania state code, but they did. God bless you. So then I went to the, this is still from their website. So this CCSSI, the Common Core State Standards Initiative, the people who own the Common Core standards and wrote them. You'll learn more about it later. And that's all very good. The learning goals outline what a student should know and be able to do. Didn't sound diabolical to me yet. And then I went to the Pennsylvania Code, pacode.com, and I found that the Pennsylvania Core was standards. The language started to match a little bit. It was based upon a nationwide state-led process. Now this is the PA Core that they told me was completely different than the Common Core. Coordinated by the National Governors Association and achieved, this is right off the PA Code website. If you haven't been out to the PA, www.pa.com, you'll find Chapter 22, or Title 22, Chapter 4. All this stuff is out here. Now that I know what I'm looking for, it's all in the public domain. That's the beauty of it. They came in back door and everything was sneaky, but now that it's out there and they're working with public schools, well, things have to be made public. That's how we operate. That's how we communicate to the teachers, to the administrators. So it's all out there in the code. You just, now that we know it's here, we know how to find it. So again, remember that standards are what, or the what, and curriculum and instruction are the how. I'm going to flip over to Peg's video now, enjoy it, and if we don't get through it, I'll be glad to come back because I'd love to animate you guys in any way that I can.
I'm Dr. Luksik, and I will be your host for this presentation. Let me begin by telling you a little bit about myself. I am a teacher with over 35 years of experience in education. I go special ed and elementary ed. I've taught everything from preschool through college in pretty much every educational setting. I have written curriculum and evaluated. Welcome to this presentation of Pennsylvania and the Common Core State Standards by Founded on Truth. I'm Dr. Peg Luksik, and I will be your host for this presentation. Let me begin by telling you a little bit about myself. I am a teacher with over 35 years of experience in education. In both special ed and elementary ed. I've taught everything from preschool through college in pretty much every educational setting. I have written curriculum and evaluated curriculum and trained teachers both in how to teach and in classroom management. For a number of years, I worked for the U.S. Department of Education. My job was to review and evaluate education reform initiatives. The program you're about to see today will consist of government documents, curriculum examples, sometimes newspaper articles. The reason that we use government documents is so that you can see what the official language says. In the case of Pennsylvania, we'll be using the documents that Pennsylvania submitted to the U.S. Department of Education, either to receive money or to receive regulatory relief. Why? For the same reason that when you go to a bank and the bank asks you what your income is and you say $1,000, the bank says, let me see your IRS tax return. Because you might lie to the bank, but you probably didn't lie to the IRS. Similarly, if the Department of Education tells you, the citizen, that they're doing X, but they told the federal Department of Education that they're doing Y, in a document they use to receive money or to receive relief from regulations, they're doing Y. And so if you want to know the truth about what's happening in education, it's important to look at what Pennsylvania told Washington that they were doing in implementing Common Core. Now, Common Core didn't begin just yesterday. It has a very long history, but in the interest of time, we're just going to look briefly at the past. In 1989, President Bush the Senior was in office, and William Clinton was the governor of Arkansas and the chairman of the National Governors Association. They had a summit, and at the summit they decided to implement an education policy that was radically different than what had happened in the past. It basically broke the tradition of local control. It established national education goals, saying that there had to be standards set. It was called America 2000. When Mr. Clinton moved from governor of Arkansas to president, he passed legislation in 1994 called Goals 2000. In that legislation, the federal government actually mandated that the states set achievement standards and measure student performance against them, and then change schools where students didn't make the grade. When we hear that this was a state-led initiative, and sometimes we hear, well, the states were already doing standards, Common Core isn't a big difference. The states were mandated from the very beginning by the federal government to set those education achievement standards. This was never a state-led initiative. The federal government was in the driver's seat all the way back in 1994, which is 20 years ago. This has always been a federally driven effort to gain control of education at the local level. Now, when Goals 2000 was passed, there was a huge public outcry. The legislation didn't have any teeth. That was changed in 2001 with the passage of No Child Left Behind. That was in the presidency of President Bush the Jr. No Child Left Behind was what was called a reauthorization bill. Constitutionally, there is no role for the federal government in education. It was supposed to be a state and a local issue. The way that the federal government got around that prohibition beginning in 1965 was to pass a bill that made boatloads of money available to the states. It was called the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, and it authorized literally billions and billions of dollars to flow from Washington to the state departments of education if the state departments of education complied with Washington directives. Legally, the states didn't have to apply for or accept the money, so they were volunteering for the mandates. But once they took the money, the mandates applied. Because it was a funding bill, it had a lifespan. Funding was made available for X number of years. When that number of years was up, the federal government either had to reauthorize the funding or let the program and the mandates lapse. The Elementary and Secondary Education Act has been reauthorized, money continually made available multiple times since 1965. The 2001 version of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act was called No Child Left Behind. No Child Left Behind said that every state had to develop a plan that included academic content standards and academic achievement standards. Content standards, this is what the state will teach. Achievement standards, this is what the children will learn. The standards had to apply to every child in the state at every public school. They were in math, reading, and science. The standards had to be rigorous. This is where the word first begins to surface. It is actually a marketing word, and we're going to see it carried all the way through the Common Core marketing as well. And as this presentation goes on, we'll see how the word rigorous is actually defined by the education establishment. The standards had to define 3 levels of performance. There were 2 high levels, advanced being what you think. Proficient, that was passing, meaning the student was operating on grade level. Basic, some mastery, but not enough to be considered passing. The state had to develop assessments, and every year they had to give the assessments, and then they had to prove that they were making progress toward the federal mandates of how many children had to be proficient. It was called adequate yearly progress, and the state had to set benchmarks saying every year more kids are going to be proficient in the test, particularly kids at the bottom of the achievement levels. They were supposed to be moving up so that we closed the gap between who was proficient and who was not proficient. How did they measure? The state had to develop academic assessments in math, reading, and science. They were given each year, and they were the way that the state measured the performance of the children. No Child Left Behind established a timeline. It said that by 12 years after the passage of the act, meaning the school year that ended in 2014, every state had to demonstrate that every student was proficient in math and reading and science. So it redefined how the federal government interacted with the states, from guaranteeing universal access, every child shall have the opportunity to receive a quality education, to mandating universal proficiency. 100% of the children in every state in the nation will be reading and doing math and science on grade level by the end of the 2014 school year. Now, that was an impossible standard. There's no government mandate that is going to result in 100% of the children learning on grade level, any more than you can pass legislation that says we're going to throw a ball up in the air and it's not going to come down. You can't mandate an impossibility, but they did. So the states were stuck with, okay, now what do we do to make this impossible thing a reality? Well, the legislation said that the states had to set a proficiency level, but they could set it wherever they wanted. There was no designated level that this is what it means to be proficient. Every state could set the bar wherever they wanted. Pennsylvania first did the PSSAs and then moved to the Keystone exams. So since the Keystone exams are the latest one, we're going to look at them. Pennsylvania established, you see the little colored boxes. There were 4 levels of performance. Advanced, proficient, and basic were the 3 federally mandated levels, but Pennsylvania added a below basic, children who weren't even partially getting the subject area. Then you see the box that says Keystone exam scores. This is where the state explained how they scored the test. That's fairly small, so we'll make it bigger. The state looked at each test, took the raw score, there were 10 questions, I got 7 of them correct. They assigned a scale score, saying, well, this raw score equals this scale score. And what they reported to parents and teachers and taxpayers was the scale score. They didn't tell you what the raw score was that resulted in that scale score. But what they said was that a given scale score has the same interpretation regardless of the length or difficulty of the exam. For example, a scale score of 1300 always implies the same level of student performance and always falls in the same performance level. Did they tell you what the performance level was? No, they did not. People got scale scores, but they never got, well, what does that scale score mean? But the department actually did have an underlying, these are the raw scores, so let's take a look. This is what Pennsylvania used as their raw scores for Algebra 1. You see that there are 2 modules. Each module has 3 sections. If we look at the very first section, A1.1.1, operations with real numbers and expressions, there were 9 possible points in that part of the test. If the child got 3 of them, the child was considered passing. That's proficient. 3 out of 9 is at 33%. In no section of the test did the child have to get more than a 60% to be passing or proficient. So parents got a scaled score. They had no idea what the raw score was underneath it. And then they got a little piece of a certificate that said, congratulations, little Johnny is proficient. They were never told that proficient meant 60% or below in the Algebra 1 state assessment. No teacher on the planet and no parent on the planet, if a child had a test paper that said anywhere from 33% to 60%, would say, congratulations, Johnny, you're proficient. But the state did in their state assessment. Remember, the state had to show that children, whatever increasing numbers of children were proficient, but they could define proficient however they wanted. So when confronted with a mandate that's impossible, they manipulated the data to make it look like kids were passing when they weren't. Pennsylvania was not alone in this. All of the states had the same impossible mandate, and all of the states manipulated the data. You are looking at a 2008 chart from the National Center for Education Statistics. The brown bar at the top is where the National Assessment for Educational Progress puts its achievement level for getting a label of proficient in the national assessment. The blue stripe in the middle is the achievement range that would be basic, partial mastery. And then the light color at the bottom is below basic. You don't even have partial mastery. The little red flags are where every state defined proficient in its state assessment. Not one single state defined proficient at the same difficulty level as the national assessment. They were all below the difficulty level. Only 8 states defined proficient at the difficulty level that the national test called basic. And 42 states defined proficient below an achievement level that the national assessment would consider even partial mastery. Did anybody notice? Well, not for a while. But as these children who were getting these little certificates saying, congratulations, you're proficient, and the state is meeting its benchmarks of all these children are all of a sudden becoming proficient. But as the kids finished high school, they went to college. And the colleges were reporting increasing numbers of children needing remediation. By 2010, the National Center for Public Policy and Higher Education published a report saying nearly 60% of our first-year college students require remedial courses in math and English before they can even begin taking credit-bearing courses. So we have children who are being told they're proficient at the high school level, getting to college, and finding out they need remediation. Well, how could that be? Remember, the states were implementing education policy. They were writing the test, they were scoring the test, and they were reporting on their own results. That's an internal audit. Would any bank give a business a loan based on that? No. But we trusted the education of our children to that kind of reporting. When the kids got to college, an external, independent audit, all of a sudden the failure of the system became obvious. By 2010, we had 8 years of No Child Left Behind. That's 2 full generations of high school students coming through this process that was supposed to raise achievement by government fiat, instead lowering what our children were producing. Now, as this became obvious, and it became obvious even before 2010, that we were having some problems, the opportunity to manipulate the system even more became apparent. You are looking at a grant from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. It was given in 2008 to the James B. Hunt Institute for Educational Leadership and Policy. It was a $2.2 million grant, and the grant was given to this institute to promote the broad adoption of rigorous, there's that word again, internationally benchmarked education standards by the states, one set of standards. Now, $2.2 million. Is that a lot of money? Well, it depends on how much money the Hunt Institute actually raised that year. After all, if I give you $1 and your budget was $1,000, that dollar, you're grateful, but it really isn't going to change your policy. But if I give you $1 and your budget was $2, well, then you're going to pay a lot of attention to what I want you to do. In the year that the Hunt Institute received this $2.2 million grant from the Gates Foundation, their reported income was $2.5 million. So they were very open to what the Gates Foundation wanted them to do. Promote the adoption of these rigorous internationally benchmarked education standards. Well, what did they do? The first thing they did was create a newsletter called Blueprint. And the newsletter said that they were partnering with ACHIEVE, the Alliance for Excellent Education, the Council of Chief State School Officers, and the National Governors Association to explore the potential for a common core, now the word has surfaced, of rigorous internationally benchmarked education standards. Now, rigorous internationally benchmarked, those are the marketing words. They're going to appear again and again and again. Were they actually partnering with ACHIEVE? Well, yes, they were, because Governor Hunt, the chairman of the Hunt Institute, was also the vice chairman of ACHIEVE at the time. So the Hunt Institute is partnering with other nonprofits to explore the potential. Do you see any state legislatures in there? Neither do I. The Hunt Institute didn't receive just one grant from the Gates Foundation. Between 2009 and 2013, they received multiple grants for millions of dollars. The first one, for a little over $5.5 million, was to support states seeking to rapidly implement the Common Core. So we've had, from 2001-2002, No Child Left Behind, mandated achievement standards, not working, having problems. Instead of addressing well, why isn't this working? And having a national conversation and taking our time, the Gates Foundation is giving money to rapidly implement the Common Core, not addressing does mandated achievement even work, instead moving toward one set of standards. Instead of having all the states do it, we're going to combine all the standards into one so the states lose the little bit of control they do have. And we're going to move as rapidly as possible. To facilitate that, the Hunt Institute, in the second edition of their newsletter, talked about a growing number of state and national organizations that have expressed support for a set of voluntary content and performance standards. And then they list a number of organizations that they say are out there clamoring for one set of standards. Well, let's look at each of the organizations. Did they receive funding from the Gates Foundation? In fact, they did. The funding ranged from $4 million to over $37 million in a 5-year period. One exception was the National Association of Secondary School Principals. They're funded in a completely different formula than the other nonprofits. The regular nonprofits all receive money from the Gates Foundation. So we have the Gates Foundation giving money to the Hunt Institute to market the Common Core standards. The Hunt Institute says all of these organizations are clamoring for a Common Core of standards, and everyone on the list, except the principals, was also funded by the Gates Foundation. And then the Hunt Institute used Gates Foundation money to respond to the Gates-funded clamor in education. So it was a marketing circle with the Gates Foundation money driving the wheel around and around and around. Earlier we talked about how the Hunt Institute was partnering with Achieve. Achieve is a nonprofit, and they say that they're actually the leaders in this effort, and that they help transform the concept of college and career readiness from a radical proposal into a national agenda. The website gives a little history and concludes by saying at the direction of 48 states and partnering with the National Governors Association and the Council of Chief State School Officers, Achieve helped develop the Common Core state standards at the direction of 48 states. Makes it sound like all the states were working with Achieve. Not one state legislature passed either a resolution or legislation authorizing Achieve, a private nonprofit organization, to develop education standards that would be mandatory for every child in that state. Not one state legislature appropriated one single penny to Achieve for the development of education standards that would be mandatory for every child in that state. This was not led by the states. It was fed to the states. Gates Foundation money created the marketing impetus and funded the development of the standards. And then the Achieve group, partnership here, actually went to the states with the standards and sold them to the states, telling them if they adopted the standards, they would be eligible for federal money or to escape from federal mandates. And we'll look at the federal push in this in just 1 minute. Well, who actually wrote the standards? In the beginning, no one knew. There was an outcry. Finally, the National Governors Association issued a press release talking about the State Standards Development Work Group and listing the names of the experts who served on the work group writing these math and English standards. They said the group was composed of content experts from Achieve itself, from the ACT, and from the College Board. No classroom teachers. In fact, not one active K through 12 classroom teacher was a member of the work group, nor was one college-level, freshman-level college professor in math or English. In other words, what does it mean to succeed in my freshman year class? Well, wouldn't you think you'd ask somebody who's teaching it? They weren't on the work groups as well. The architect of these standards was a man named David Coleman. He was considered the lead writer. He actually applied to the City of New York public school system for a job, and they declined to hire him. So this is a man that was not hired to teach any child, who was now driving the education standards for all of our children. The press release went on to say that the work group's deliberations would be confidential throughout the process. We don't know who chose the members of the work group. We don't know why they were chosen. We don't know which members of the work group did what in writing the standards. We don't know what did they consider when they adopted the standards, what was their evaluation framework. There's no minutes of meetings. Everything was confidential. In other words, the standards were developed in secret. Many of us have heard that, well, no, there were teachers involved all over the place in writing these, and we get lists of all of these people were involved in writing the standards. All of these people on those lists were members of what were called the feedback groups. Feedback groups could give information to the work group, but the press release said final decisions regarding the standards will be made by the work group. The feedback group was an advisory role, not a decision-making role in the process. Now I'm a parent and I have 6 children. And when they were little, every night, sometimes they would ask me for a treat, and every night I could say no. I didn't have to give a reason, and my word was final. The feedback group were the children, and the work group were the parents in this picture. No matter what suggestion the feedback group made, or what observation, or what critique, the work group could say no, and the decision of the work group was final. Finally, there was a validation committee that was supposed to look at the overall process and make sure they were, in fact, internationally benchmarked. In the validation committee, there were 2 content experts, one in English and one in math. Both of them declined to sign off on the Common Core state standards, saying they never got any information on international benchmarks. They were told they had to sign non-disclosure agreements. When they wrote their comments and critiques, they were appalled to find that not only did they just sort of disappear from the list of the validation committee, but their comments were not included in the final report. So it looked like the validation committee was unanimous in implementing or in supporting the standards, when in fact that was not true. You can look at the standards. They have a website. This is it. You notice at the beginning that the standards are protected by copyright. Now, if they were actually developed in a state-led process with taxpayer dollars, they couldn't be copyrighted. To use the standards, you have to have a license, and you have the ability to copy, publish, and distribute and display the standards for purposes that support them. So your use of them is limited to positive feedback and positive implementation, no critiques. There's actually a copyright notice that says that the National Governors Association and the Council of Chief State School Officers shall be acknowledged as the sole owners and developers of the standards, and a copyright notice must be listed unless a state adopted the standards, and then the state didn't have to tell anyone that they actually were a copyrighted product of 2 private, nonprofit organizations and had been developed secretly. The website goes on to have a few pieces of language that are very disturbing. Have you ever bought a car? You can buy a brand new car and you get a manufacturer's warranty. It's bumper to bumper for this many years and this many miles, whichever comes first. Or you can buy a slightly used car and you get a partial manufacturer's warranty. Or you can buy an older car and you get a dealer's warranty. Perhaps the dealer will guarantee the motor or the transmission for 30 days or 90 days or 6 months. Or you can buy the oldest, most dilapidated cars, and you buy those cars as is. You know, the dealer says, well, it's working today. It may not start tomorrow. We make no guarantees whatsoever about the condition of this car. Well, that's how the Common Core standards are offered. The website says that the Common Core standards are provided as is, and the 2 groups that develop them take no responsibility whatsoever for the product which they are force-feeding to every public school child in the country. The website goes on to say that these 2 groups can't be held liable for anything that goes wrong in education due to the adoption or the implementation of the Common Core standards. So the 2 groups that developed them take no responsibility for the product that they have developed, even though that product is being force-fed to our children. Did anybody notice? Yeah, people did. This is an article from the Washington Post. It was called A Tough Critique of the Common Core on Early Childhood Education, and it was written by 2 early childhood education experts. And these folks actually looked at all the members of the different feedback groups and all the outside panels that developed or had in any way participated in the development of the K-3 standards. And what they found was that none of them was a K-3 classroom teacher or early childhood professional. When the standards The first draft came out in March of 2010. Early childhood professionals were shocked. Stephanie Feeney from the Advocacy Committee of the National Association of Early Childhood Teacher Educators said the people who wrote these standards don't appear to have any background in child development or in early childhood education. The writers of the article said the standards, they're not obviously not research-based because there's no opportunity for feedback or improvement, which a research-based program always says, well, how is it working and how can we fix it and let us know what you think so that we can continue to improve our product. Remember, these standards were offered as is to all of the states. Did anybody else comment? Well, yeah, the Common Core folks say they received over nearly 10,000 public comments. They published 24. That's 1/4 of 1%. And all 24, amazingly, were positive. Not all 10,000 were positive. In fact, there was a statement signed by more than 500 early childhood professionals opposing the Common Core state standards. The statement said that those folks had grave concerns about the core standards for young children. The proposed standards conflict with compelling new research in cognitive science, in neuroscience, in child development, and in early childhood education about how young children learn, about what they need to learn, and about how to teach them in kindergarten and the early grades. That statement was signed by teachers and pediatricians and child psychologists. It was signed by the 3 past presidents of the National Association for the Education of Young Children, which is considered the foremost professional organization in early childhood education in the United States. Copies of that statement were hand-delivered to 11 different officials in the 2 organizations writing the Common Core state standards. They were ignored. And when the standards were finally published, Dr. Carla Horwitz of the Yale Child Study Center said that many of our most experienced and gifted teachers of young children are giving up in despair. They're leaving the profession because the core standards will cause suffering, not learning, for many, many young children. Now, that's the nonprofit side. What was happening on the government side? Well, first we had No Child Left Behind, which we looked at. President Bush is done in 2008, and President Obama is sworn in. And one of his first acts is to pass the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act, the stimulus bill. Inside the stimulus bill was a $53.6 billion appropriation to the Department of Education called the State Fiscal Stabilization Fund. That fund included Race to the Top money. Race to the Top was a little over $4 billion of the $53 billion, but the states were eligible for the whole $53 billion if they made progress toward rigorous, there's that word again, college and career ready standards, and they established pre-K to college and career data systems. The states not only had to say, well, generally we're going to do it, they had to sign an assurance statement saying that they would establish the data system, not only that they would establish it, but it would include elements in federal law. So we have federal law, federal dollars, federal law. Doesn't sound state-led at all, does it? Well, what were the elements and how much money did Pennsylvania get? Pennsylvania got $1.9 billion in stabilization money funneled into our Department of Education. In order to get the money, we had to first implement the data system. So let's take a look at it. This is the training documents from the U.S. Department of Education on how to implement the statewide longitudinal data system. It came from the National Center for Education Statistics, and the states were told that they were going to have to use this money to connect early childhood, post-secondary, and labor data. It was a cradle-to-grave system. It followed you from way before school started, early childhood, all the way into the workforce. It had to connect teachers and students so that we could match them up to force teachers into compliance. It had to make the data available to researchers and public stakeholders. Public stakeholders were anyone with a legitimate educational interest, including vendors. How did you know? They filled out a form to the U.S. Department of Education and said they had a legitimate educational interest, and then they could have access to the data. The data had to be able to cross state lines. So every state's data system had to match every other state's data system. What were the elements? Well, if you look at number 1 and number 7, enrollment information and transcript information, sounds innocuous until you think of all the things you tell the state when you enroll your child in school. You tell them their age and who they live with and what your family structure is, and perhaps your religion, and you give them your health records. And if you are applying for a free or reduced lunch program, you may be asked to supply your IRS tax return. Transcript information is not just grades, it's all discipline records. Think about the ridiculousness of what's happening in discipline today with 7-year-olds being suspended because they thought a Pop-Tart looked like a gun. Any extracurricular activities and any information that is collected inside there, like your weight. Information on whether you graduated or transferred, state assessment scores, college readiness test scores. Every teacher is identified. We can share data from preschool through college, and every student has an identification number that follows them forever in the system. It was called a P through 20 system, P being preschool, K through 12 being what you think. 13, 14, 15, 16 is college, 17, 18, 19, 20 is the labor force. It began in 06 and 07 with K through 12 funding. Then we added, the middle box was post-secondary, early education, and collecting data on the teachers and the staff members of our schools. And finally, with the stimulus bill, we had labor data, your financial records, and your health records. So it's a complete dossier of the child. Now, are data systems evil? Data systems are neutral. They just collect data. The problem with this data system is that the information is accessible from local to state to federal. Parents can't opt their children out. You can't limit the data that is collected. You can't deny someone access to your child's data. You can't say, okay, you're collecting it, but nobody else can have it. You have no control whatsoever over a database dossier of your child that follows your child forever. Now, the data system is a huge problem. Pennsylvania, when they passed their latest version of their education regulations to finalize Common Core, said the department shall not expand the collection of student data due to the implementation of Pennsylvania core standards. The key words here are due to the implementation. Notice, it doesn't have a period after expand the collection of student data. It says they won't expand it because they're implementing Common Core. Well, they didn't need to. When Pennsylvania in 2010 applied for Race to the Top money, in our grant application, the Department of Education told Washington that by 2013, Pennsylvania's data system would already have the ability to track students from birth to the workforce. So it would be done by the time the 2013 regs were passing. They said that back in 2010, we were one of the only states to already have an integrated early childhood to post-secondary data system. In 2010, we said that we already had all of the elements. Remember that chart we looked at from the American Peace Act? We already had all of the elements in the chart done in 2010. But if that was not enough, in 2010, Pennsylvania got additional federal money. We got a $14.3 million grant to connect to workforce data and to collect data on early childhood educators, not just on the children, but on their teachers. This is the $14.3 million grant that we got, and major outcomes is at the bottom. It's a little small. We'll make it bigger. There you see the $14.3 million was to help us connect to workforce data. We're expanding the post-secondary database. We're expanding student and teacher data. Our data system is called the Pennsylvania Information Management System. We're linking kindergarten assessment outcomes and demographic data. We are implementing an electronic student records exchange. We are connecting studies across all agencies and states. So it's not just the Department of Education, the Department of Health, the Department of Labor, the Department of Criminal Justice, Children and Youth. All data is collected, and now we're going to be able to put it together. Many folks have gone to the Pennsylvania state and said, well, we have concerns about the data system, only to be told Pennsylvania doesn't have one. We most certainly do. It is called the Pennsylvania Information Management System. We've just seen all the money we received, and we've seen that we told Washington we do, in fact, have a data system with all of the elements mandated by federal law, and you are looking at Volume 1 of the user manual. If you want more, you can Google Pennsylvania Information Management System and look at the entire volume, and there are multiple volumes, for yourself. Who's in the data system? Every public school child and every child in an approved private school in the state. two elements in the stabilization fund. The data system, which we've looked at. The second one was that we would move toward these new content and achievement standards. They were also mandated by the America Competes Act, federal law. Once again, training sessions were held. This was a November 2009 session. Pennsylvania sent representatives and the federal government said, well, we're now expanding from K through 12. This is cradle to career education. So we're starting before the kids come to school, all the way back in early childhood. The federal government is expanding its reach, and we're following the children all the way to career. How do we do that? Well, we're going to set standards, and we're going to control your assessments. Every state can either join a consortium, one assessment, or they can develop their own. But if they develop their own assessments, they need to send them to Washington for approval before they can use them. So Washington controls the standards and controls the assessments. Now, we often hear, well, no, this is just standards, it's not curriculum. Washington told them from the very beginning that they had to align their instruction to the standards. Look at this example. The standard is that you have to make a chocolate cake that tastes just like my chocolate cake and has the same texture as my chocolate cake. And the assessment is, I'm coming to taste your cake. In the end, how many recipes can there be? One. Because if you change anything in the recipe, your cake won't taste like mine, nor will it have the same texture. If I control the standard that you must achieve, and I control the assessment that I'm going to use to measure your standard, I control what happens in your classroom. Now, did Washington not realize that they were mandating? Oh no, they certainly did. As No Child Left Behind continued to move forward, and the states were no longer reaching benchmarks, and were no longer even able to pretend that they were going to meet that 100% proficiency level, they began asking the federal government for waivers. We want relief from this regulation. And the U.S. Secretary of Education told Education Week, yeah, we'll give you a waiver, but it's going to have strings attached. We're going to require any state that wants a waiver to adopt federal education priorities. There was nothing voluntary about this. If the state did not want to be punished because they couldn't meet an impossible proficiency standard, they were required to embrace what the federal government wanted them to do in education. Pennsylvania tried for the waiver, just as all of the other states did. It was called the ESEA Flexibility Request, and this is Pennsylvania's, the latest version dated February of 2013. The states in the request had to meet certain principles. The very first principle was that the state adopted college and career-ready standards in reading and math that are common to a significant number of states, and they had to attach evidence that they had done so. The evidence was a memorandum of understanding that the states signed with Achieve, saying that they had adopted the Common Core state standards. Pennsylvania selected that option. If they did not select the option of adopting the Common Core state standards, their other choice was option B, where they had all the colleges in the state come together and come up with a set of standards, and then the colleges had to certify that the children would meet these standards, and if they did, none of them would need remediation. In other words, 100% of the children would be proficient. So the state could either adopt the Common Core state standards, and you notice there's no such guarantee required if you adopt the Common Core standards, or they could ask for a waiver for 100% from the 100% proficiency standard by having the colleges certify that they would meet 100% proficiency standard. No wonder that almost all of the states chose option A, and Pennsylvania did as well. In our application, we told Washington that we've actually created a crosswalk at the state website to show how the Pennsylvania standards match the National Common Core standards. And we told Washington the alignment of the two is well documented. Now in Pennsylvania, the Department of Education is telling parents and legislators and taxpayers, no, we're not doing the Common Core. In one hearing, the representative of the department said they're so different, we probably shouldn't even have kept the name. But they told Washington that they were aligned. And they told Washington that the reading and writing standards in grades 6 through 12 for history and science mirrored the Common Core. And they gave 2 Pennsylvania website locations to be able to verify that they were the same. So let's look. This is where they send you. There you see on the left-hand side at the bottom, PA Common Core crosswalks. So this is page 1 of the crosswalks. On the far right-hand side are the old academic standards. The middle column is the National Common Core standards, and on the left are the Pennsylvania Core standards. So let's compare. And to make it easier to read, I took those two last columns and made them bigger. Remember that now the column on the right is the national standards and the column on the left is the Pennsylvania standards. And if you even glance at the two, you can clearly see that they are word for word the same. Let's look at another page and follow the same process. The column in the middle is the national standards and the column on the left is the Pennsylvania standards. We will make them larger. And again, if you look at the standards, you can see that they are word for word the same. Every now and again, Pennsylvania adds a word. For example, in the very first one, they added the words "and tools" to the standard. That's the only change that was made. So when Pennsylvania says that they were different to you, they were not telling the truth. Because not only did they tell Washington they were the same, they proved to Washington that they were, in fact, identical. Now, the math standards do not look word for word the same, but every Common Core standard has a Pennsylvania equivalent, where Pennsylvania says, well, the words are different, but we're telling you they're the same. A math expert actually did look at the Pennsylvania math standards and said, well, in his expert opinion, Pennsylvania took mediocre National Common Core standards and dumbed them down. Now, you remember Pennsylvania said that our reading and writing standards in grades 6 through 12 in science and social studies mirrored the Common Core. And they gave a website. So, let's look. The far left column is the grades 6 through 8 standards, and the blue box is the national standards. And once again, you can see that they are word for word the same. If we scroll down through this one section, we look at each area, and you can see what I did was I matched them up, so that in every case you can see that when Pennsylvania said we mirrored the Common Core, they actually literally meant the word mirrored the Common Core. Is Pennsylvania doing the Common Core state standards? Yes, the only thing we changed was the name. Here's the final batch of grades 6 through 8, and once again you can see that they're identical. Now, the Department of Education actually signed a contract with a company called Data Recognition Corporation for the purpose of developing some of our tests. And this is, I went to the DRC website to see, well, what do they say they do? They said that their expertise is to develop Common Core state standards aligned items for the Pennsylvania classroom diagnostic tools for reading in grades 3 through 8, for literature, for writing, for English, for math, grades 3 through 8, and algebra. They developed Common Core state standard aligned items for the Pennsylvania Keystone exams. So if our state assessments are based on the Common Core state standards, then wouldn't our curriculum have to be based on the Common Core state standards as well? Because otherwise the children would not pass the assessments. After all, if I have an assessment that's on American history, but I'm teaching Russian history, the children won't pass. The only way that this company could be developing Common Core state standards assessments to be used in Pennsylvania is if Pennsylvania is teaching the Common Core state standards. Now, Pennsylvania, actually, the Department of Education put together a fact sheet saying, no, just standards, has nothing to do with curriculum. Curriculum is totally a local option, and they handed this fact sheet out everywhere that they could think of. But what did they tell Washington? In March of 2010, Pennsylvania sent representatives to the United States Department of Education to defend our Race to the Top grant application. And in that conversation, the Pennsylvania representative said, student level data is in the portal, and our SAS portal, that's the website that we looked at with the crosswalks, it has model curriculum in it as well, and it's updated for Common Core, and it's available to everybody. And the gentleman from Washington said, now, available. Do you mean available, or is that a polite way of saying required? And the Pennsylvania representative said, the portal is our model curriculum, it's available, but everybody has to teach to our standards. That's required. And everybody has to implement our end of course exams. That's required. So in order for them to get to their high school exams, which will be aligned to the Common Core, they're going to need to access all that stuff. Our experience is that when we have made mandatory things available, pretty much everybody's using them. The last time I looked, mandatory and voluntary were in fact not synonyms. In the written application, Pennsylvania told Washington that every school district in the state must update its instructional program to reflect the new standards, and they must use the state-mandated new assessments. We anticipate, said the department, that given the limited resources most districts have for curricular improvements, the overwhelming majority will rely on the SAS portal to bring their instructional program in line with the new standards. In other words, Common Core is very expensive. You won't have the money. We're going to give it to you for free. Let's think about our cake again. Remember our chocolate cake, and there's one recipe. If I take the one recipe that will let you pass my taste test, and I put it online and say you can access it for free, won't you all go get it? Absolutely, you will. Now, how does Common Core get implemented in Pennsylvania? This is from one of the training sessions conducted in Pennsylvania, and they began by talking about rigor. And rigor means approaching math with a disposition to accept challenge and apply effort. Rigor is not difficult, like AP Calculus is rigorous. In fact, the math graduation requirement in Pennsylvania under Common Core is Algebra 1. The only math class that our children must demonstrate that they have passed to graduate on a Keystone assessment is Algebra 1. Are we alone in that? No. William McCallum was one of the members of the work group that we talked about a little bit earlier in math. He wrote in the math standards, and he took draft standards to the National Conference of Math Educators to show them the standards. They hated them. They said they were obtuse. They said they were poorly written. They said they expected too much in the early grades. They said, why are you moving so fast? His response was, well, the speed is being forced by the federal government because the federal government is using Race to the Top money to get the states to force the states to commit to adopting these standards sight unseen, but not to worry because the standards wouldn't be too high, especially in comparison with other nations where math education excels. He wasn't the only one saying so. Trevor Packer, who was the senior vice president of the College Board, addressed the American Association of School Superintendents in 2013, and he told them that calculus sits outside of the Common Core. It's not part of the Common Core sequence. In fact, Common Core asks that educators slow down the progressions for math. Nationally, that's also being echoed. This is a document called What Does It Mean to Be College and Work Ready by the National Center for Education and the Economy. The National Center's chairman, Mark Tucker, actually, the very first thing we looked at in this presentation was an article written by Mark Tucker, who's been involved in implementing this policy from the very beginning. They wrote a document, What Does It Mean? And what they said was that it means being ready to be successful in a community college program. They further define that by saying middle school math and Algebra 1 by the end of your sophomore year in high school. Because they said most community colleges start with Algebra 1. So you don't need to know Algebra 2 in high school to go to college and take Algebra 1. Most of you are probably thinking those standards are pretty low. In fact, they are, and the folks knew it. Their document concludes by saying these are very low standards, but the kids have to meet these before we can even think of moving things up. Well, is that a good idea? The U.S. Department of Education actually does look at what works in education. In 1999, they published a document called Answers in the Toolbox, and what they looked at was what in high school is most likely to lead to success in college. And they said that the highest level of math you study in high school has the strongest influence on getting a bachelor's degree. And that if a child finishes a course beyond Algebra 2, it more than doubles their odds that if they go to college, they'll actually get a degree. But if you don't have to take Algebra 1 till the end of your sophomore year in high school, that would put geometry in your junior year and Algebra 2 in your senior year. So you wouldn't get beyond Algebra 2. In fact, in September of 2013, there was a televised debate. I and two others debated, the Secretary of Education and two others. And in the debate, one of the Secretary's compadres looked at me and said, well, Peg, I don't know what you're complaining about. They could still take AP Algebra 2. And I stopped and looked to see if anyone was going to contradict him, but no one did. Because if you take Algebra 1 in your sophomore year, and Geometry in your junior year, then Algebra 2 would be the AP course. Currently, in our pre-Common Core classrooms, if someone is taking Algebra 2 in college, it's not a credit-bearing course. It's a remedial course. And the AP Math course is calculus, not Algebra 2. The Department of Education study was not the only one. Auburn University in 2004 sponsored what was called a meta-analysis. Two researchers looked at all of the studies that had been done in what constitutes success in college. And what they found was this: the highest level of secondary math rose, the likelihood of degree attainment followed. Students who took calculus in high school were 28 times more likely to be a high achiever. Not just finish college, but be a high achiever in college. And that the level of math taken, regardless of your race or your socioeconomic status or the kind of high school you went to, was the largest indicator of your college achievement level, no matter what major you took. So getting to calculus, 28 times more likely, not just to finish, but to be a high achiever, no matter what background you came from. Yet Common Core slows the math progression down. You wonder how all of the research in Common Core somehow didn't know in 2014 what all of the research did know in 1999 and in 2004. Does this mean that every child should take calculus in high school? No. Does this mean that every child should go to college? No. But it does mean that no education policy should, by design, deny our children the opportunity to have the high school experience that opens the most doors for success and for college and for achieving their dreams by design. And Common Core does exactly that. What about English? This is the training material, and what they said was, in the old way of teaching English, you would read a story, and then you see a little question. The baker most likely behaves as he does because he lacks, and there's 4 characteristics. But the trainer told myself and the other attendees, that's not rigorous and thoughtful reading of the text. The new way is better. The new way says, which of these 4 sentences tells you that the baker lacked generosity? At this point, I could not be quiet, and I raised my hand and said, no. The old way is the more rigorous way. In the old way, they have to read the story. They have to figure out what did the baker do, and then they have to draw a conclusion about a personality trait or lack thereof based on the behavior that they saw. In the new way, they don't even have to read the story because they get 4 sentences that basically answer the question internally. How can it be close and thoughtful reading of a text if you don't have to read the text? Common Core changes how we teach English language arts. By grade 12, they're only reading 30% literature and 70% informational text. Does that matter? It does. Western civilization is transmitted through its literature. Think about the effect that Uncle Tom's Cabin had on the world. It was a literature book. But if you're only reading 30% literature, they won't have time to read the whole book. So when we change the focus of what happens in our literature, in our English classes, we change the way that our children are being taught about and experiencing Western civilization. Even in what is being taught, the teachers are being told, you must use just the language of the text when you teach the text. And the example from the presenter was the Gettysburg Address, and the participants were told, when you teach the Gettysburg Address, you're not supposed to talk about why the North and the South were fighting. You're not supposed to ask the children if they've ever been to a funeral. You're not supposed to talk about whether or not equality is something worth fighting for. You're only supposed to talk about the words of the Gettysburg Address, which is actually sort of ironic, because the Gettysburg Address says the world will little note nor long remember what we say here, but it can never forget what they did here. But when Common Core teaches the Gettysburg Address, we don't talk about what the soldiers did. We only talk about what Lincoln said. but that's not the worst of it. This is a literature textbook. You see it says Common Core Edition. It's produced by Pearson, is the publisher. They're a UK-based company. They're the largest publishing house producing Common Core both testing materials and curriculum materials. Prentice Hall is their American affiliate. This is their 12th grade literature book. And on the very first page of the student book, the very first thing that the children are told is that every selection in the book is available in audio format. So the first thing we tell the children is that they don't have to read a single word in the book. Not sure how it could be close to thoughtful reading of the text if the first thing we tell them is that they don't have to read the text. But not only do we tell them they don't have to read it, they don't even have to listen to the whole thing because they get a selection summary audio for everything in the book. It's kind of like an audio Cliff Notes or Sparks Notes. Now, we all knew, and if we're honest, we probably use them ourselves, we all know that our students use those, but good teachers, we design tests and assignments and activities that require them to actually read the selection, not just the summary, because we want them to experience, for example, the language of Shakespeare, not just a summary of who did what when. But the first thing that a Common Core 12th grade book by the largest publisher of Common Core materials tells our children is you don't have to read a word, you don't even have to listen to the actual language. We will give you the Cliff Notes version of each selection. And since we produce the summary, and we produce the activities, and we produce the tests, everything's going to match. How can it be close with thoughtful reading if you don't have to read at all? Now this certainly sounds like a lowering of standards, even worse than what we had before. So when they get to college, won't that external audit show that even more children need remediation? Common Core folks have thought of that. And in our Race to the Top grant application, Pennsylvania told Washington that the post-secondary institutions in the state will have to revise their programs to incorporate Common Core standards, and Pennsylvania will, if necessary, mandate those adjustments. Well, what will they have to do? They'll have to make the Keystone exams be their placement exams. These are the Keystone exams. They are taken in 11th grade. There are 3 that must be taken to graduate. They are Algebra 1, Literature, and Biology. So our students don't have to take any class, math class beyond Algebra 1 to graduate, and they don't have to pass Algebra 1 until the 11th grade. Remember National Center for Education and the Economy? Algebra 1 by the end of your sophomore year in high school? The test is in 11th grade. And that will become the math placement exam for our colleges. Now, let's look at what happens in this Algebra 1 exam. This is the 2013 Administration Manual. The first thing that we notice is that the students can use calculators when they take the Algebra 1 test. They can use scientific calculators and graphing calculators, not just adding and subtraction. The tests are untimed. If they need to take all day to take it, they can take all day. They're given a formula sheet to solve the problems. This is the formula sheet. So they're given the formula for how to find area and how to find volume, and then they're allowed to use a calculator to plug the numbers into the formula that we give them. This is a plug and chug test. It is not an Algebra 1 test. They actually don't have to know how to do these things in terms of knowing how to figure out what area or volume or inverses are, but they don't have to know how to do the arithmetic either, because they can use a calculator to plug in the numbers. The test also includes what are called constructive response questions. That they can get up to 4 points. The test has multiple parts. This one had 4 parts. The first section was a math question. The child got it correct. The second section is a math question. The child got it correct. The third section was a graphing question. The child got it correct. The fourth section, explain why this worked out this way. The child said the slope is negative because miles go up. That wasn't a good enough explanation, so they didn't get that point, which means they got 3 out of 4. That's like a 75%. But they did all the math correctly, and this is a math test. They got graded down because they didn't write about it well. Now think about how this affects children and which children will be affected. First it will be boys, because boys, particularly boys, 3 of my sons are engineers. If you ask them why they did the math the way they did, they would look at you and say, because that's the way it worked. And what they're not saying, but thinking is you dummy. If you ask children with learning disabilities, who may be able to do the math, but may not be able to write out why they did what they did. They'll get graded down, not because of math, but because of writing. ESL students, who maybe don't do standard language. Students with lower socioeconomic backgrounds, who perhaps have mastered the math, but are not yet able to write a complete paragraph in standard English. They'll get graded down and be placed in math remediation, not because of their math skills, but because of their writing skills. But this is a math test, not a writing test. So it is not measuring what it's supposed to measure, but the results are worse than that. Because children who are placed in math remediation will have their math progression slowed down even more than the delay caused by Common Core. But remember, the largest single factor in giving success in college is math. So the higher you go in math, the more likely you are to be successful in college, irrelevant of race or socioeconomic status or the kind of school you went to. But this process slows math down, and it slows math down twice, based on a test that had nothing to do with math. The Keystone exam includes a statement saying that they're going to verify all the student demographic information. So the booklet comes with the student demographic information. But in the regulations that Pennsylvania passed in 2013, the State Department of Education, the State Board said that the Department of Education is prohibited from collecting individual student test scores and can collect only aggregate test scores. That's what they told the legislators, and that's what they told you as citizens. What did they tell Washington? Do you remember the data system with the required elements? One of those elements was yearly state assessment records of individual students. In our State Fiscal Stabilization Fund report, Pennsylvania told Washington we had completed that element. In our Race to the Top grant application, remember we said we had all 12 elements. This element, yearly test records of individual students with respect to assessments, Pennsylvania said we met that element. Pennsylvania currently collects student-level data on all state assessments within the Pennsylvania Information Management System. When we got the $14 million grant from the National Center, we said we used some of that money to collect yearly test scores of individual students. And the company that creates our Keystone exams actually put out a newsletter explaining what happens when you get your report from the state on your Keystone exam. And the report is the little inset that has the little circle, half circle on the top from the Department of Education. Part number 1 is student information, and part number 4 is students' Keystone exam results. So Pennsylvania told you that they're not allowed to collect individual state assessment scores, and they're not. And they told Washington, starting in 2010, that they are collecting individual state assessment scores on our students and storing them in the state database. So they told you X, and they told Washington Y. Which statement do you think is true? It's not just Pennsylvania that has changed its testing. The GED test is now Common Core compliant. The students get a source text and then a writing prompt, and they're graded on how well they use the information, how well they justify their point of view, what facts and figures and data do you use. The source text on global warming says global temperatures are increasing because of human industrial activity and population growth. That's a political statement. Global warming is the source of a huge political debate in this country, with thousands of scientists on all sides of the fence if temperatures are increasing or not, and why. But the students sitting in that GED test are given one political point of view, and only one political point of view. What if they don't agree with it? Then how are they going to back up their answer? It's like if you agree, it's an open book test. But if you don't agree, you had better know all the information out of your head, because we only give you one political side of the argument. Well, those who take an open book test almost always get a higher score than those who are required to close their books, especially if you didn't know what the test was going to be about in the first place. But the GED test determines if you graduate from high school. if and what college you get into, if and how large of a scholarship you get. This is sorting children based on their political point of view. It is not a writing test. It is a sorting test, but nobody knew it. The SAT has also moved. David Coleman, remember the chief architect of the Common Core State Standards, whom the New York City public school system declined to hire, is now the head of the College Board. And he said that one of his top priorities was to make the SAT reflect the new Common Core standards. So they've moved it back to the 1,600-point scale. They've eliminated the vocabulary section. They removed the penalty for incorrect answers, and they've scrapped the essay. The vocabulary that is now used will focus just on words we need for college and career. We don't need any of those obscure words that you would have found in literature. The math section drops whole topics. Basically, anything that was difficult was dropped from the SAT. The SAT used to be an outside audit, but the developers of the Common Core are now using the test and revamping the test, so it's an inside audit. So, again, parents and students and taxpayers and teachers won't know what their kids don't know because the test will no longer measure it. We're not measuring the students against a standard. We're measuring the standards against the students and changing the standards to hide the fact that the kids are not achieving what they were before. This is not moving achievement up. It is moving the definition for success down. Now, if our students actually read literature, this dumbing down and limiting what you read and limiting your vocabulary would actually sound very familiar. The book was called 1984. It was written by George Orwell. In the book, Winston rebels against Big Brother and is eventually caught and put into first interrogation and then re-education. And in the course of the interrogation, his interrogator, whose name is O'Brien, says to Winston, "Don't you see that the whole aim of newspeak is to narrow the range of thought? In the end, we shall make thought crime literally impossible because there'll be no words in which to express it. Every concept that can ever be needed will be expressed by exactly one word, with its meaning rigidly defined and all subsidiary meanings rubbed out and forgotten. Every year, fewer and fewer words, and the range of consciousness always a little smaller. Has it ever occurred to you, Winston, that by the year 2050, at the very latest, not a single human being will be alive who could even understand such a conversation as we are having now?" I always like to end with good news. This is my granddaughter. She's a year and a half, and she's the delight of my life. Why am I showing her to you? Well, one, she's adorable, but two, you have a face that looks just like that in your life. One that as soon as you think of her or him, that little face makes your heart sing. In August of 2013, the State Board and the Department of Education testified in front of the House Education Committee regarding Common Core. And in the testimony, they talked about how education actually needs to move to a manufacturing model so that all of what we produce is the same, like widgets. They went on to say, for example, that when you buy a hamburger in McDonald's in Erie, and then you go to Philadelphia and buy a hamburger, the hamburgers are the same. Why shouldn't our children coming out of schools all be the same? Does anybody think that the hamburger is the client of McDonald's? Does anybody think that what is done to the ground meat to make a hamburger is for the benefit of the hamburger? No. When did our children move from being the clients of the educational system to becoming its products? We do something to a product for a client. Common Core then is not something we're doing for our children, it's something that we're doing to them. That's not what education was supposed to be about. I get asked a lot, why am I involved in this? I travel the country, and it's funny, I see women everywhere standing up and fighting back. And in one audience, a gentleman actually asked about it, why so many women? And I looked at him and smiled and said, well, sir, you know, it's been said that fathers will die for their children, and God love you, gentlemen, you will. Mothers will kill. When the Department of Education declared war on every child in America, they forgot that all of those children have mothers and grandmothers attached to them. And none of us are ever going to say, yeah, okay, you can have our children. That will never happen. This is a war the Department of Education is going to lose. Now you know the facts. You know what this is and where it came from. I beg you to stand up with me and push back to defend the futures of our children and our nation. They don't have anybody else to stand in their behalf and protect them. Talk to your legislature. Get involved. Go to foundedontruth.com and sign up for additional information. You can order additional copies of this presentation that you can share with family and friends. The worst thing you can do is nothing. Our children and our nation depend upon each of us standing up and in a resounding way saying, not now, not ever, with the children of America. Thank you for listening.
What was the name of that? Is it on YouTube or something?
I can send all the links to all the documents.
Yeah.
I think Peg has some of her videos unfounded and true, I'm just not sure.
Yeah, but she has
This whole presentation may not be on.
Right. Well, last time I checked,
So
that was one of her CDs, yeah, I actually purchased that. The one she has out there, or when she's actually giving the presentation to audiences. Yeah, do you want to have some questions? You want to, it's 10?
Yeah, we got started a little bit late. It is 10 to 9. We're going to take about 10 minutes. We want to particularly maybe give some ideas about what we can do in our own, our own context or
I
whatever.
want to talk a little bit longer. Is it okay if we stay a couple more minutes, guys? Some questions?
Okay, and if there's questions, we can go ahead.
Yeah, if you had any problems with the presentation, Peg actually, she's a doll. She gave me permission to broadcast it today, and she made your video. And she even offered me insurance. She said, if anybody has any problems with any of the material, have to get in touch with me. And she did make one false statement. She said the Algebra 1 test is administered in 11th grade. It has to be administered by 11th grade. Because if you don't pass it by 11th grade, you have to go into that project-based assessment. So she just misspoke a little bit there. You can take Algebra 1 as soon as you complete it. We have some kids are doing it in, I don't know, 8th grade. At Boone. As soon as you're done the course, the only requirement before you take the PSAT is that you complete the course. And then you can take it, again, all those ways. They come into the school 3 times a year. They come in September, April, and over the summer to try and make it available. So we're going to take a little break then.
Just any questions or any
Okay.
ideas on what people...
Come on up, we'll try to answer them together.
Well, I get involved in this, but recently, the project-based assessment, when I first heard that, I thought, oh, okay, the kids who can't do the computer test and all of that, they're going to be plumbers that will have to make a project with pipes and things. That's not the case. I heard recently that it is another computer test that those kids can take.
Yeah.
Okay, they're not verifying.
And I haven't actually looked at them yet because they were still in Belton. I went on the website today and saw that they are out there. And here's a good one. They're graded. They couldn't put any more money into this process, like above board money. So in order to get teachers to grade them, they won't let the same teacher who tutored it, who mentored them. There has to be a teacher and supervising this whole process too. So they took care of the union, okay? But in order to get teachers to grade it from other school districts, they they offered to waive the requirement to get their Act 88 credits that year.
Act 48.
Act 48, excuse me. The Act 48 credits
It's
that
not
year. All of a
really
sudden, the
appropriate.
training doesn't matter. It's a requirement as a school district that we give our teachers so many, they have to get so many credits every year, Act 48 credits. But now, all of a sudden, they need graders for their PDA. It's just morphing and it's a regulation. So, go ahead.
You know, William Bennett was interviewed by Fox recently. I don't know if anybody's talking here, but it was about Common Core.
I know, I don't know what's up with that.
he was supportive of it, but the thing that was interesting about the whole, he didn't really deal with the substance of the objections that were going on about it. He really didn't seem to address it. He poo-pooed it and sort of knocked it, but he didn't address substance.
I
That's
can't
what I
even
mean.
listen to him anymore. I got so upset, I don't understand.
I remember a time when really disabled children did not go to school, and they didn't have to. And then all of a sudden, every child has a right to an education. So then they carted them up in their wheelchairs, they bought these wheelchair buses and they carted all these kids off to these schools. So I'm wondering if this was a part of the plan.
Yeah,
To say, because it says every
Every
child has
to
to
see
get this. So they have to really be able to get these children who can't even see.
Yeah, and we're thinking that there are some sort of waivers now. When they first passed the law, it was every kid had to be proficient. Now it's morphing a little more, it's more burden on our administrators. There's a waiver process in some of the special education to be able to opt out. I'm told I haven't even seen that yet. It's just what my administrator was telling me.
There's a tremendous amount of the money that was supposedly due to the states went to special education. A large percentage of it. I'm sitting around something, I particularly want to focus on what we can do or what you can let your son or daughter know that has children in the schools, or your neighbor or whoever you might know that actually has children in the schools. And I know we've got moms with us who are actually trying to do something. So, Sandra? Yeah. So I want to give Sandra a couple minutes to share kind of what she's done and what other parents could do, and then if there's any other ideas about action that can be taken. But I'm going to send this around because I know what the way to stop it in the state is by putting enough pressure on our legislature that they do what has been done in Arkansas. No, there is at least one state that has Oklahoma, that actually has rejected it. Right. So it's possible, but that pressure has to be brought, and it will be brought to bear just not only by citizens, but especially if you can get people on your school board, you get people who are actually administrators or educators or whatever, teachers or whatever, they will have a little bit more.
We need to get the ball rolling.
So I'm going to send this around because if you'll put your name and your school district and your phone number, you don't have to be the one who knows everything about it, but if you can just be a warm body to go with another 1 or 2 or 3 people to talk to the school district superintendent or talk to, a couple of school board members or something. Numbers helps, and if you can just, be a person to go along with somebody who would know more facts.
Stuff on their websites.
Right.
Talk to a representative every week, put it on your to-do list, call somebody, tell them your gut-wrenching stories, ask them what they're telling about, be a test, put it on your phone, so you set a timer. Every Monday, I'm going to call a different guy in Harrisburg. Look at the people on the education committee, they're looking for horror stories right now. Because as I say, they're just coming into the light of this. A year ago, nobody knew anything about it. My understanding is they're actually looking for first-hand stories from third parties. Look it up, find out who they are, find out who they are.
And Craig Stats is on the education committee. So if you're in Paul Clymer's district, our new state representative is on that committee. So he's definitely one that you're going to want to go visit with information, call him or whatever. Sandra, I want to give you a few minutes.
So, just within, locally, I'm Daniel Boone School District. So this year, my son, I have one in 2nd, 4th, and 6th. And I had, briefly heard here and there the word Common Core, but it really didn't mean anything to me until this year when my 4th grader came home with math homework that he used to be in the door after school, 10 minutes of his homework, and back out the door playing, turned into 20 minutes, 30 minutes, and him starting to become frustrated and crying and saying, I can't do this, I'm dumb, I don't understand it. And then me looking at it going, well, I need to relearn it too, because I had to figure it out to reteach it. So there was, and on Facebook you'll hear moms all over the place, Common Core, this math, they don't understand it. So in our district, there was a few of us that got together and we started to meet with Carol, who is on our school board. We talked about not liking the math program and what we really could do a little bit, within the school district about it. One thing is we can opt out of the PSSAs, which the kids PSSAs are the test that my kids in elementary school will take. They're not up to the level of the Keystones yet. You have to write a letter to the school, and you have to ask to see the Keystone, or the PSSA testing. They'll let you review the testing, and then you have to write a letter and state that it goes against your beliefs. Now, with opting out of that test, it doesn't change them from going to that math class. They're still learning that math, but they're not going to be sitting down and taking the test on the computer, which, you know, creates a little bit of more stress within their school day that they have to worry about preparing for the PSSAs as well as all their other work. Other than that, we have had, there was a local meeting with our PTC that sponsored some school board members and some of the school principals and stuff like that. And there was a few parents that did express their frustration with the math. And we asked, you know, to look at a different tool to use, a different math curriculum, or is there different ways, or different tools that they can use instead of just using Common Core math that and that is something that they, you know, will hopefully look into. You know, and other than that, you know, my oldest, I have 3 children, and I have 2 in the public system, and I have 1 in private. So my oldest is in private, and you know, Common Core.
But a lot
Tell
of
them that when they already.
They are, he's in private school, and they use Singapore math. And Singapore math was already, when they came back with this book, and it was this first year that it said on the front, Common Core aligned. And when the schools looked into that, it already, it took the Common Core standards, which says if by 3rd, 4th, 5th grade, the child has to know this, and this. And that Singapore math already met and exceeded that level, so they could slap that Common Core line on that textbook, because it already, but it's still the same, it's the same that, you know, that I was taught. It's not this
So it's
crazy.
really not Common Core math.
You
Well,
say Singapore
it's
math
Singapore
is
math.
similar to what you learned as a child.
Yes. Well, I mean, and it is, yeah, I mean, it is definitely higher level than, yeah, it's a hard math curriculum, yes, but it's not this crazy way of doing it. So there are other tools or curriculums out there for math that do meet that, they align with that Common Core without dumbing it down. But some of the school districts, like ours, you know, our math problems, some of them are very confusing, and I had to figure it out to be able to reteach my 4th grader. So.
Isn't Singapore also a homeschool curriculum?
I don't know.
I think it is. So homeschool your kids.
Oh, that's weird.
Yeah, that's another way
quick thing on
around
that.
it.
The problem with these Common Core standards is, they're supposed to be standards. They're supposed to say what we want them to learn. They should be able to add. But they venture, from my opinion, into curriculum, because it says add using a number line and base 10 and blah, 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 blah. So it's infuriating.
And it's so convoluted that the
Yeah.
teachers are having.
So, and that was one of our, at the meetings that we had with some of the school board members, it is that, you know, even the teachers are saying, if you don't understand it, put a question mark, and,
Failure.
yeah, it is.
Yeah, it's about Common Core. George Will had a column on Sunday, anti-Common Core, and pointed out that Senator Lamar Alexander from Tennessee introduced bills in the past years, but it never got out, it never got to the
If they
floor of the
defund
Senate.
ESOL, it all goes away. This is
But-
all coming in under that.
But he's introducing it again now, that it's back in
So-
Republican
so
control.
there's
So maybe
something-
there'll be more people
It's
that.
to divest the federal government from anything to do with
That's the answer.
education. It's the
And-
states that have to
Right.
do with education.
And
Yeah.
personally, you know, Common Core didn't mean anything to me until it hit home. And now that it hit home, then, you know, now
I would agree. You know, it's like an education activist to give up to do every.
How entrenched are these Common Core assessments as far as entrance admittance into the collegiate level?
Nowhere yet. Not yet. where nobody's looking at it.
I'm a little confused, I want to make sure I have this right. This was an excellent presentation, and is it available any place online?
You got it now. You just videoed it.
We make a video of all of our meetings, and as soon as that's on our website, we will let you know.
Oh, okay, so it'll be on the
It's usually
website.
about a week after our meeting, and we'll be able to post this. the video
Okay.
of
I'm
this
glad you
entire
agreed.
meeting.
I just think she just.
Oh, it was
put all
excellent,
together.
excellent,
Yeah.
yeah.
So, there's still lots of things to talk about.
Yeah, but I mean, on her website, and of course I'm gonna look at
It's a
it, does she have a lot of, does she have
She has a
video?
lot of stuff, yeah, you want to get
And
that?
then the way it is,
I'll send
where
all
you
the
were
stuff.
going, you know, as,
Right.
you know, a parent in a school district, you know, I have found that even going, you know, to the school board and within talking to people, there's only so much that the school district can actually change because it is state mandated that Pennsylvania is Common Core aligned. So they can only change it a little bit. It has to come from legislators of Pennsylvania opting out as a
What we can
complete
change is some of the
state.
testing, because what I'm finding out is, besides the keystones and the PSSAs, there's all kind of testing along the way. They're called PVASs, PVAAS, Pennsylvania Value Added Assessment System, the CETs, Classroom Diagnostic Tools, and these kids are tested every 5 weeks on every subject to see how well they're progressing to getting towards the keystone and to getting towards the PSSA. I'll send a chart of the testing on our district here year round. There's new estimates for saying these kids are being tested between 80 and 100 hours a year. They're only in school 180 days and they're not even full hours. So it's over half of their time in school is tested and being retested and tested to see how close they are to doing well on the test.
That goes to everybody takes some extras for these to pass out, because there are plenty of extras.
But the school has indicated to me that they might be looking at some of the diagnostic testing and maybe they could ease up on the kids a little bit because they're starting here these mornings and I'm very. And they're just trying to be very open and responsive.
And you have to go to your school board and you have to find somebody to work with, which luckily we have
Put
Carol
somebody
in
on
our
the
school, in our
Get all
school.
these curriculums and
But
policies.
they can only change it a little bit. They can help you with the testing and opting out a little bit, you know, and they can provide alternatives to do for if you opt out of that testing. But it has to be, Pennsylvania has to opt out as a state to pull it all together. It's not being pulled all together.
Yeah, but what can you say on the letter to opt out? Isn't it a religious
It
thing?
has to be, yes, it has
That's the
to
only
be.
reason, but you don't have
Yeah,
to
but
say
what
what
can
you
you
Religious
say?
or philosophical?
Religious
No.
things were.
Wait a minute, so religious or philosophical?
That's the only thing that you can say.
Yeah.
You don't have to still enrich
Education
religious
is
tenets
made-
or.
And
Yeah.
don't wording
Don't.
somewhere that you.
Yeah,
secular.
I'm not advocating, I'm a school board advocate, I'm
That's
just
exactly what you're
clarifying
right.
the
And
law.
they cannot question you. And they
I
cannot
just happen
question
to
you.
know that.
But now,
Folks, the handouts that are coming around, that's tools that you can use to inform people. Two of them are by Sandra Stotsky, who is a professor, a well-known, actually nationally known English professor, educator, who was instrumental in creating the Massachusetts English Standards, which has helped Massachusetts to have actually a very successful educational program. But Sandra Stotsky, the fact sheet and the other sheet by her, that's a very credible source. When you go to a school board member, when you go to a district administrator, a principal, you want a source like Sandra Stotsky. She's not politically aligned. It's nothing to do with politics. This issue is nothing to do with politics. It has people from every political spectrum who care about children and know about education who are so up in arms against it. So two of those are that. The other is the opt-out. So please make copies of these or take more. We have plenty of copies. This is something you can give to a parent.
It is
Opt-out
communist,
information.
so if you're a communist, you're going to be offended.
It went around.
But please take copies and get those to somebody who will take them in and give them to a teacher, give them to a principal, or do it yourself. Or even within your district, just be a resource, to come to help, because it is scary to write the letter and say you want to opt out. I mean,
You have to get a group together.
Yeah, and then you sort of have to do it with
I
public.
volunteer, and I have some parents who just approach me, and I don't say much. They're the teachers and they're all in a corner. They're not willing to give up their job, and I wish some of them would. But parents are the ones that are going to stop this. I mean, I'm old, I'm down at Harrisburg all the time, but they don't care. It's parents, and parents will give the support to teachers who also, they know they don't want this. They hate it, they don't use their professional abilities with all of this, and it's a nightmare. I just wanted to say something to everybody. I don't know if everybody knows who Diane Ravitch is. She's been an educator for many years, and she spoke the other night at Lehigh. And she was always a very strong union supporter. And I didn't know really what to expect, but in recent years she's come out against Common Core and against the evaluation for teachers. And she pretty much said what we said here tonight, which I'm encouraged to hear. But she said about the testing that we are over-testing children, and she would be for testing every other year. And I was like, ooh, yippee, and in the year that you don't test on an as-needed basis, if you need to know something that, was going on with a child, you can request it or do something like that, but we do need to have documentation. We have to have something to show the parents, but in my day, when I'm a reading specialist, I'm retired, but we had the California and the Stanford and these achievement tests that I could show this parent and say, well, here are the weaknesses, here are the strengths, and this is what we're doing to help your child. And I was in No Child Left Behind, and we keep saying, well, when are we going to get these, details, to share?
Well, it used to
Oh,
be a
yes, they're
number.
coming, they're coming.
But
Oh,
then we went into percentiles and then proficient. You don't get anything from that.
well, now it's even less, when you just see the, proficient, everybody thinks, yay, yippee, but when you see what Peg says, that yes, she passed 3 out of 9 questions in that one little section. Children and teachers are not allowed to teach children.
They're not allowed
This
to.
country
They're
was
always
always
being
built on.
Yeah, there's no creativity.
Yeah, no. And I don't know if anybody saw it, I would love to have told everybody we're working, but PCN, if you look on the computer, it probably will be repeated, but they had the hearing that was mentioned today, and it was very good. They had 3 people on, Nita Hogue, who is really fabulous. She's been around for many years, and she was talking about the contracts that are signed by, the state to get into some of these things. These legislators know nothing about this. And how it got into our state was through regulation. Governor Rendell signed this, and his name's on it in 2009 to get the $1.9 billion. And he brought it in, and it circumvented the legislators. I've been down there, and they're, what?
Is that like an executive order?
Well, it's one way to do it, but our Constitution says that if any money is spent, the legislators have to pass that. They have to be on board with it, know about it. And they went around and, so, like Peg said, all those things, they told me my school board to my face still swears at me, but we don't have Common Core. And I'm laughing, but they showed up at the Ravitch talk the other night. They were all incognito, though.
Today, it's not done that way. It doesn't, just because the Constitution doesn't, you can't do it that way. It just means that somebody has to be willing to stand up and fight when they don't do it that way.
Yeah, that's what we have the Constitution for, but not a lot of people think there's any reason to follow any rules or laws.
Okay, folks, I want to close the meeting officially, and feel free to stay and talk and chat and share ideas. But those are just some resources. On our website, we do have a Common Core tab, and we will add to it after this meeting, so you can check that out. Peg Luksik, founded on truth.com, and then PA Restoring Education, which is the new site for the Pennsylvanians Against Common Core. They changed their name. Also, I would highly recommend Dr. Duquesne's video and Jane Robbins' videos as well as Peg's, obviously. So thank you so much for coming. Thank you for signing up. What we'll do is we'll get you in touch with others in your district by using this list, and we'll try to do that within the next week. Our board can hold me accountable to that. Okay, make sure we do that. And please spread the word and share your experience with us. You know, let us know. We do have a committee. Carol Allen is on it, Sandy Slater, and Kathy Bester. This is our Common Core committee. Connect with those ladies if you want to really get active, and thank you for coming.
Thank you.